hardest part wasn't at 2 a.m. It was actually around dawn, when we were still pushing past the 5,000 meters on Pico de Orizaba. 5,636 meters, that's the summit. But already at lower altitudes, the air feels like half of what your lungs actually want. Also, the cold at this altitude is a different kind of cold. It creeps into your bones and the oxygen gets lower every step. Your legs don't just want to stop anymore. They're begging for it. At this time, my son was walking a few steps ahead of me. And I watched him keep moving through that grey light of the headlamp, and I thought this is actually what I wanted to give him. Not an advice or theoretical ideas of how to behave or what to do. Just this. Experience. Friedrich Nietzsche called it Selbstüberwindung, or self-overcoming. And by that he meant not to push harder to prove something. He was actually talking about the act of turning the will against its own resistance. And the mountain actually shows you how small you are. The mountain doesn't care whether you thumb it. So overcoming doesn't mean overcoming the nature or the mountain. Overcoming is entirely internal. And just before sunrise, at 5,000 meters, with your son ahead of you and your body screaming to stop, that becomes very concrete very fast. Most of us men in midlife have been given achievement targets our whole lives. We had to hit the number and get the promotions and all of that. But what we usually haven't been given is an experience of real initiation. A moment where the outcome is uncertain and the only resource is yourself, not to depend on somebody or something. And that is what physical challenge transformation actually is. And the same applies to fatherhood. There's a version of us parents that is actually all about instructing. And we're telling our sons what we know. But then there's also another version, which is actually also powerful. It's when you stop talking and you're just doing the thing and your son watches. So I have spent 25 years studying Nietzsche and Jung and learning about personal development and how to become better. But that's theoretical knowledge. On that mountain last week, I didn't need to explain anything. We didn't even have to talk. What passed between me and my son was not information. It was more like demonstrated capacity. The capacity to continue past the point where stopping feels reasonable. And the moment when I recognized that my son learned the lesson was around 10 a.m. At this time, we had about 200 meters more to climb to the summit. That sounds little, but we're talking here about another 2 or 3 hours technical, difficult hike. And we were already climbing for more than 7 hours. So in a break, my son told me he wants to stop. He wants to turn around. And I didn't try to convince him otherwise. I knew it was his call. And that moment actually made me very proud. Because it was not so important if he made it to the summit or not. Important was that he started to understanding his own capability and that he was making a decision. His own decision. Against his pride and his ambition. Just what made most sense for him in this very moment. And that's a very powerful skill to learn when you're 15 years old. Before he started the descent with another mountain guide and 2 other people, I told him how proud I am, and I told him goodbye. There was nothing more to say. The silence was the transmission. And I think for my son, that was his start on his way of becoming who he is. And that's what Carl Jung described with his individuation. The process of becoming who you are. And mountains are actually one of the oldest symbols for that process in human psychology. The ascent is a metaphor for the ego pushing towards something larger than itself. And when you reach the summit, it's the contact with yourself. And finally, the descent is the return. Usually you come back changed, as a new person. But for a man in the second half of life, the mountain asks different questions. Who are you doing this for? And why? So for me, my son's presence changed what the climb was for me. Because in this moment I was being witnessed. Jung would call that a mutual individuation event. Neither of us was the same person on the descent. We talk a lot about passing values to the next generation. But values stated under comfortable conditions, they're just opinions. But values enacted under pressure, they are something else completely. So I really see climbing Pico de Orizaba with my son as a philosophical act. It was a deliberate choice to make self-overcoming visible and shared. So usually I don't care so much what other people think about me. And also Nietzsche's Übermensch is usually read as a solitary figure. But there is another reading, and I think it's the more honest one. And that says that the capacity for greatness can be witnessed, it can be transmitted, and it can be inherited. The father who overcomes himself in front of his son is making the path visible. And I'm not talking about the path up the mountain. I'm talking about the paths of life, with all the circumstances that life brings with it. It's not about endurance. It's not about resignations. It's about active choosing. And on Pico, I wanted my son to see that choice being made in real time. And the best thing was, he made the choice for himself. Now in a few weeks I start a 1,300 kilometer bikepacking ride across Mexico. Pico de Orizaba was vertical self-overcoming. The altitude and the cold compressed into one long push. The ride is more horizontal. It's about the distance, the days on the road. So these are two different expressions of the same Nietzschean structure. It's about the will to power turning against its own resistance. And that repeatedly. The stories I'm telling you here are not about mountains or are not about bikepacking. They are stories about what becomes possible when you stop explaining self-overcoming and start enacting it. Go out and do it. And about what your son or your daughter or whoever is watching you inherits from that enactment. Now I hope I gave you some food for thought. What would your version of this experiment look like? This was my mountain and my ride. What is yours? Before you start now to design it, it can help to know what you're actually overcoming. And most men in midlife are overcoming a version of themselves built for someone else's expectations. So if you want to find out more about yourself, I've put together an archetype test. It's about 10 minutes that clarifies exactly that. What is your expectation about yourself? The link is down in the description. And don't forget to subscribe because the ride through Mexico starts soon and you don't want to miss it. I will document it here, so see you on the road.